I want to start with a sensory image today. I want you to, if you can, just close your eyes and imagine the smell of boiling sugar.
Okay.
You know, like pralines, pecans, chocolate. It's this thick, sweet, almost sticky smell.
I can almost taste it. Yeah, I'm with you.
Now, place that smell in the heavy, wet humidity of Houston, Texas. It's the early 1970s. You're in a working-class suburb called the Houston Heights. And there's this family-run business called the Corll Candy Company. It's, you know, a staple of the neighborhood. And right across the street, literally right there, is Helms Elementary School.
It sounds so wholesome. It sounds like classic Americana, doesn't it? A small business, a schoolyard right across the street.
It does. And running the place is the owner's son. His name is Dean. He's about 30 years old. He's quiet. He's polite, impeccably groomed with short hair.
Right.
And he is famous in the neighborhood for one very specific thing.
Yeah.
He gives away the product. If you're a kid on your bike or walking home from school, Dean comes out with a handful of pralines, free of charge.
And the kids, inevitably, they gave him a nickname.
They call him the Candy Man.
The Candy Man.
Sometimes they also call him the Pied Piper. And looking at the sources we have today, that second nickname is so on the nose, it actually makes my skin crawl.
Because the Pied Piper, in the original folklore, he didn't just play music to entertain the children.
No.
He led them away. He led them into a cave, and they were never, ever seen again.
Exactly. We are looking at the case of Dean Corll. And I think for a lot of people, especially if you didn't grow up in Texas, this name might not ring the same bell as, say, John Wayne Gacy or Jeffrey Dahmer.
It's not his household, no.
But looking at the stats you pulled, it absolutely should be.
It should be right at the top of that list. I mean, if you just look at the timeline, we're talking 1970 to 1973, Dean Corll, with the help of 2 teenage accomplices, abducted, tortured, and murdered a minimum of 29 boys and young men.
29, minimum.
And that is a conservative floor. At the time the story broke in August of 1973, it was the deadliest serial murder case in United States history. It shattered the entire concept of safety in Houston. It wasn't just a crime, it was catastrophe.
But here is the mission for this deep dive today. We aren't here to just recount the gore. I mean, you can find the gruesome details on any Wikipedia page.
Right.
I want to understand the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
Because here's the paradox that I can't wrap my head around it. How does a man known for kindness, a man who was literally viewed as a father figure, to half the neighborhood operate a slaughterhouse in plain sight for 3 years?
That's the core question, isn't it? And to answer it, we have to look at 3 very specific things in these files. First, we have to look at the psychology of grooming. I mean, how he didn't just capture victims, he captured accomplices.
Teenagers themselves.
Teenagers. Then we need to look at the systemic failure of the police and this whole concept of the runaway generation in the 1970s that gave him cover.
And finally, we need to talk about the science. Because even today, 50 years later, there are forensic anthropologists who are still trying to give names to bones found at a boat shed.
It's an ongoing investigation in a way. We've got a massive stack of records here. Witness statements, court transcripts, forensic reports. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's look at the man behind the mask.
Who was Dean Corll before he became a monster?
Dean Arnold Corll. He was born on Christmas Eve, 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Christmas Eve.
Yeah. And if you look at the early biographical notes, you see a pattern forming almost immediately. It's the pattern of the outsider.
How so? What do you mean?
While his home life was intense, to put it mildly, his father was strictly disciplined, very authoritarian. His mother, Mary Emma, was the complete opposite. Extremely protective, almost suffocatingly so.
A classic push-pull.
Exactly. And they divorced when he was young, and Dean just became this pawn moving around constantly. Tennessee, Texas, Indiana, back and forth. He never had a chance to set down roots or keep a friend group for more than a year or 2.
I also saw a note here about his health, something about rheumatic fever.
Yes. And this is a crucial detail that often gets overlooked in the crime summaries. He contracted undiagnosed rheumatic fever when he was 7. It damaged his heart valves.
Which, in the 1940s, that's a serious sentence for a kid.
It is. But think about the social implication of it. The doctors told him he couldn't exert himself. No sports, no roughhousing, no running around.
So while all the other boys are on the football field or playing tag, Dean is on the sidelines.
Or he's inside with his mother. He's physically separated from his male peers right from the very start. He can't compete in that traditional boy arena.
So he becomes an observer.
Exactly. He was described by teachers as shy, serious, a bit of a loner, But, and this is the part that helps build that Candyman mess, not at all. He was the kid who would help you if you dropped your books. There were no early signs of sadism, none of the typical McDonald triad stuff like bedwetting or arson. He was just quiet.
Which makes the turn into what he became so much more baffling. You expect that future killer profile to include cruelty to animals or bullying.
But Corll didn't fit that mold. So let's fast forward to the 1960s. The family finally settles in Houston Heights. His mother and stepfather start this candy business, initially right in their garage. And Dean isn't just a helper. He is the engine of this business.
He's the vice president, right? I saw that on the letterhead.
Right. But that title makes you think he's sitting in an office pushing paper. The reality, according to all the employment records, is that he was working the machinery. He was cooking the sugar, packing the boxes, loading the trucks. He was incredibly hardworking.
And then, in the middle of all this, Uncle Sam comes calling.
1964. He gets drafted into the Army. Now, for a guy who has been sheltered by his mother and separated from male peers his entire life, the Army is a massive shock to the system.
I can't even imagine. How did he handle it?
Surprisingly well, at least on paper. He trained as a radio repairman. He was good with his hands, good with electronics. His service record is spotless. But internally, he hated it. He absolutely hated it. He lasted 10 months before he applied for a hardship discharge.
And what was the hardship?
He claimed the family business was collapsing without him, the classic "my mother needs me" line. And it worked. He got an honorable discharge.
So he goes right back home.
He goes right back to Houston.
Yeah.
But there's a very interesting note from his associates around this time. When he came back, something had shifted.
It shifted how?
He was more confident, but also more secretive. He reportedly told a few very close acquaintances that it was during his time in the barracks, surrounded by men in that hyper-masculine environment, that he fully realized and accepted that he was homosexual.
Which, we have to remind ourselves, in Texas in the mid-1960s, that is a dangerous, dangerous realization to have.
It's a life sentence of secrecy. You have to hide who you are every single day. And Dean Corll became a master of hiding. He goes back to the candy factory, but he also gets a straight job. He becomes an electrician for HL&P Houston Lighting and Power.
And looking at his HR file here, I mean, he was a model employee.
The best. Punctual, polite, competent. He eventually became a supervisor. He worked there right up until the day he died.
This is so important because it just destroys that stereotype of the drifter serial killer, the loner who can't hold a job.
Not at all. Dean Corll was the guy fixing your power lines. He was the guy paying his taxes. He had stability. He had a public face that was completely reliable.
But when the sun went down, we're back to the candy factory. And that's where the Pied Piper dynamic really kicks into high gear. Paint the picture of that factory at night for me.
So the factory was on West 22nd Street. Corll lived there for a while and then later just used it as his base of operations. He installed a pool table in the back room. He had a great stereo system for the time. And he opened the doors to the neighborhood boys. It started innocently enough. Hey, come in, get out of the heat, have a soda, play some pool. But you have to look at the demographic he was targeting.
Right. He wasn't inviting the captain of the football team or the kids with wealthy parents who had country club memberships.
Yeah. No, he was targeting the strays. He was looking for the kids who didn't want to go home, the kids from broken homes, the kids who didn't have any money. Dean was the generous host.
Hungry. Here's a sandwich.
Need cigarettes. Here's a pack. Need $5 for the movies. Just ask Dean.
He's buying trust. But he's also creating a debt, isn't he?
It's dependency. He is systematically positioning himself as the one adult who listens, the one adult who gives, the one adult who doesn't judge. And this is where we have to introduce the accomplices. Because Dean Corll is unique in the annals of serial crime. He didn't just hunt alone, he recruited.
This is the part of the story that I struggle with the most. I can sort of understand a lone monster, but the idea that he could corrupt other kids to help him, that's a different level of evil entirely. Let's talk about David Owen Brooks.
David Brooks. He meets Corll in 1967. Brooks is 12 years old.
12.
He's a sixth grader. Corll is nearly 30.
That age gap alone should have been a neon flashing sign to anyone watching. It's just staggering.
It should have been. But Brooks was a kid who was really struggling. He had a speech impediment. He was awkward. He didn't fit in. He started hanging around the candy factory. And listen to what Brooks said later in his testimony. He said, "Dean was the first adult male who didn't mock me."
God, that is just heartbreaking.
It's the hook. That's the entry point. Corll treated him like an equal. He bought him things. He took him on trips to the beach. And slowly, over months and years, he desensitized him.
How does that transition happen? You don't go from, here's some free candy to help me kill people overnight.
No, it's a gradient. It's a slow, deliberate process. First, it's just friendship. Then it transitions to a sexual relationship. Brooks drops out of school. He basically lives at Corll's apartment. He becomes dependent on Corll for everything: food, shelter, money, his entire social world.
So Corll owns him.
Effectively, yes. And once that dominance is established, Corll starts testing the waters. He starts talking about his fantasies. He starts involving Brooks in procuring other boys, initially just for sex, but then slowly the violence creeps in.
And Brooks, who by this point is completely alienated from his own family and society, feels like he has nowhere else to go.
He's trapped. And then through Brooks, the circle widens. Enter Elmer Wayne Henley.
Okay, so this is 1971, 4 years into the grooming of Brooks.
Right. Brooks is driving around, probably in a car that Corll paid for, and he spots Elmer Wayne Henley. Henley is older than Brooks was when he started. He's about 15, and he's truanting from school.
And Henley's background, was it similar?
It was hardscrabble. His father was an alcoholic. His mother was trying to hold it all together, but they were dirt poor. Henley was distinct, though. He was sort of a dandy. He liked nice clothes. He wanted to be somebody. He had this ambition, but absolutely no outlet for it.
So he was ripe for a guy with money.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Now, the sources suggest something very, very chilling about their first meeting. Corll didn't initially see Henley as a partner.
He saw him as a target.
Correct. The profile fits perfectly. Young, runaway, vulnerable. It's highly likely that Henley was brought to the apartment to be just another victim. But something happened. Corll hesitated.
Do we have any idea why?
We can only speculate. Maybe Henley was tougher than the others. Maybe he was more charismatic. Or maybe Corll just saw a spark of darkness in him that he recognized in himself. Instead of killing him, Corll started talking to him. He found out Henley's family was broke, and he made him an offer.
And this is where the Dallas lie comes in. This is, in my opinion, the most insidious part of the grooming.
It is a masterclass in manipulation. Because you have to remember, Henley isn't a psychopath. At least not initially. He's a kid. If Corll had said, hey, bring me boys so I can torture them to death, Henley probably would have run.
Right. That's too much of a leap for anyone, let alone a teenager.
So Corll invents a scenario that makes the crime palatable. He tells Henley, look, I'm part of a syndicate. There's a black market ring based in Dallas. These boys aren't going to be hurt. They're being sold to wealthy families or men in Dallas. They'll have better lives.
So he reframes the entire thing. It's not murder, it's human trafficking, which is still awful, but in the mind of a desperate teenager, it's not killing.
Exactly. It creates a moral buffer. I'm not hurting them. I'm just shipping them out. And then he puts a price tag on it. Corll offered them $200 a head.
$200. Let's do the inflation math on that for today.
In 1971, 1972, $200 is roughly $670 in today's money.
Okay. So you're a 15-year-old kid in a poor neighborhood. You bring a guy you just met to a party, and you walk away with $1,600 in cash.
It's unimaginable wealth. It's life-changing money. Henley bought a car. He bought nice clothes. He started flashing cash around the neighborhood. He became the big man on the block. And that status, that becomes addictive.
But surely the lie had to fall apart at some point. They had to know what was really happening.
They did. And that is the darkest turn of the story. Eventually, the Dallas story just couldn't hold up. They saw the violence. They saw the bodies. Brooks certainly knew what was happening early on. Henley figured it out later. But by then
they were complicit. They were trapped.
They were in too deep, and they were addicted to the money and the lifestyle. They continued to bring him victims even after they knew exactly what was happening in that apartment. The moral buffer was gone, replaced by pure greed, and I think a deep-seated fear of Corll himself.
Let's talk about the methodology, because they turned this into a literal assembly line. It wasn't random opportunity. They had tools. They had a system.
They did. It was incredibly systematic. Dean Corll owned a white Ford Econoline van. And if that sounds like a horror movie trope, it's because cases like this created the trope.
What was inside the van?
He customized it. He laid down shag carpet in the back. He put up thick, opaque curtains. He stocked it with cooler chests of drinks and beer. It was a mobile party room, a rolling trap.
And they had the bait.
They had the perfect bait. Corll eventually bought a Corvette for Brooks to drive. Now, imagine you're a teenage boy in 1972. Maybe you're hitchhiking or just walking home from a friend's house. A brand new Corvette pulls up. A cool guy, not much older than you, says, hey, want to ride? We're going to a party.
Or we have marijuana, or we have beer.
Like we're just going to hang out. It was easy. They would drive the victim back to one of Corll's apartments, either in the Heights or later in Pasadena. And once they were inside, the trap closed. But it wasn't violent immediately.
Right. It wasn't a bliss attack. It was a slow play. It was psychological.
It was a game. Corll would play the generous host. He'd get the glue out. Sniffing glue or paint fumes was the big, cheap high back then. He'd pass around beers. He'd get them relaxed. And then he'd introduce the handcuffs.
The magic trick.
This is just chilling. Corll or Henley would bring out a pair of handcuffs. They'd put them on themselves and then magically slip out of them, probably using a hidden key or a shim they had palmed. They'd laugh, make it a joke. Then they'd challenge the victim. Bet you can't do it.
And a teenage boy full of bravado, drunk, high.
Yeah.
He's going to take that bet every single time.
Every time. The victim puts on the cuffs, and the moment they click shut, the entire atmosphere in the room changes instantly. The smile drops from Corll's face. There is no trick. You are locked in.
And that leads us to the torture board.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, reading the description of this thing, it made me physically ill. But we have to describe it because it shows the level of premeditation here.
It does. This wasn't spur of the moment. Corll went to a hardware store. He bought a thick sheet of marine-grade plywood. He painted it. He attached 4 metal rings to the corners with ropes and cuffs.
It was a device built for one single purpose.
Prolonged suffering. He would tie the victims to this board, and they would stay there, sometimes for days.
Days.
The autopsy reports and the confessions from Henley and Brooks confirm it. He would keep them alive. He would torture them sexually, physically. The list of implements found in his kit is a house of horrors. Glass rods, pliers, needles, all sorts of things.
But there was a psychological torture that I think is even worse, in a way, than the physical. The letters.
This is the genius of his cruelty. While these boys were tied up, terrified, in unimaginable pain, Corll would force them to write home.
Mom, I'm fine.
Mom, Dad, don't worry about me. I got a job in Austin. Or I'm going to California with some friends. Or I've met some people. I'm going to stay with them for a while.
And if they refused to write,
the torture continued, or escalated, until they complied. So these boys wrote their own goodbyes, thinking maybe, just maybe, if they wrote the letter, he'd let them go.
But the letters weren't for the boys. They were for the police.
Exactly. Corll knew the police procedure better than the cops did. He knew that if a parent walked into a precinct with a letter in their hand, even if the handwriting was shaky, even if it didn't sound right, the police would look at it and say, case closed, he's a runaway, he's alive, go home.
It was the perfect camouflage.
It was perfect camouflage, and it worked for 3 solid years.
Let's look at the timeline of the murders themselves, because there's a clear pattern of escalation. It starts relatively slow, but by 1973, it's a frenzy.
Right. The first confirmed victim that we know of is Jeffrey Conan in September of 1970. Then you have the Glass and Yates murders, a double abduction, a few months later. For the first couple of years, the spacing is weeks or even months apart.
He's being careful. He's taking his time, refining his methods.
He is. But in 1973, something changes. Corll had some health issues, a hydrocele that needed surgery, and Henley was out of town for a bit, so there was a lull. But when they got back to it in the summer of 73, it wasn't just killing anymore. It was, in Henley's own words, a bloodlust.
The spacing between murders just vanishes.
It's gone. He's killing back to back. The brutality ramps up significantly, and this is where we see the incident that I think truly broke Henley's brain. The murder of Charles Corll and Marty Jones.
These were Henley's friends, weren't they?
They were popular kids from his neighborhood. Henley lured them in. But Corll did something different this time. He didn't just tie them up and torture them. He pitted them against each other.
The gladiator scenario.
He told them, look, I'm going to let one of you go, but you have to earn it. Fight each other. Whoever wins, walks.
I can't even imagine the psychological state of those boys, being forced to beat your best friend to try and survive.
And of course it was a lie. Corll watched them fight, watched them completely exhaust themselves, and then he killed them both.
This was the state of affairs in August 1973. Corll is spiraling. The violence is out of control. Henley is deeply traumatized but still participating. It's a powder keg just waiting for a match.
And that match gets lit on the night of August 8th.
This is the night it all ends. Walk us through the setup for that final night.
It starts like any other night, really. Henley brings people over to Corll's house on Lamar Drive in Pasadena. He brings a friend, Timothy Curley, but he also brings someone else, Rhonda Williams.
A girl.
A girl! And this is a massive, massive violation of the rules. Corll's victim profile was exclusively male. Bringing a female into the inner sanctum, it was incredibly dangerous.
Why did he bring her? What was the reason?
She was a friend, she was having trouble at home, an abusive father, and she needed a place to crash for the night. Henley, in his warped way, thought he was helping her. Come to Dean's, it's safe.
The irony is just suffocating.
It's unbelievable. They get there. They start doing the usual sniffing acrylic reducer from a bag, drinking cheap wine. Corll is seething. He pulls Henley aside and hisses at him. You ruin everything.
But he doesn't kick them out. He lets them stay.
No. He decides to improvise. He waits. He waits for the drugs and the alcohol to do their work. And eventually, Curley and Williams pass out on the floor. Henley passes out too.
And when Henley wakes up,
He wakes up to the sound of metal clicking. He's in the handcuffs.
the hunter becomes the prey.
Corll has bound all three of them. He's standing over them. And he tells Henley, I'm going to kill you all. But first I'm going to have my fun.
This is the pivot point.
Yeah.
For years, Henley has been the protected apprentice. Now he's on the menu with everyone else.
But Corll makes a fatal error, a classic villain mistake. He thinks he still has total psychological control over Henley. He unties him.
Why? Why would he do that?
He wants Henley to help him with the other two. He wants to degrade him one last time. He hands Henley a knife. He points to Rhonda Williams, who is tied up and terrified, and he says, cut her clothes off.
He wants to make him complicit in this last ultimate act.
Exactly. Do this, and maybe I'll let you live. Henley is shaking. He's holding the knife. Rhonda looks at him, and she asks him a question that cuts right through the fog. She says, Wayne, is this for real? Are you going to do anything?
She challenges his humanity right there.
She reminds him that they are friends, and something snaps in Henley. He later said the thought that went through his head was, I can't have you kill all my friends.
He looks around the room, and he sees the gun.
A .22 caliber pistol. It was Correll's. It was just lying on a table nearby. Henley drops the knife. He grabs the gun. He levels it at Corll.
And Corll, does he beg for his life? Does he panic?
No, he laughs. He looks at this kid he's groomed, this kid he's owned for 2 years, and he sneers. He says, kill me, Wayne. You won't do it.
Famous last words.
Henley pulled the trigger. He shot him in the forehead.
Did he go down immediately?
Not immediately. The .22 is a small round. Corll staggered. He actually lunged at Henley. Henley fired again, in the shoulder, in the back. Corll tried to run down the hallway, maybe to get another weapon, but he collapsed.
And then there's just silence in the house. The monster is dead.
And suddenly you have 3 terrified teenagers alone with a corpse.
What do? Do they just run?
They thought about it, but Henley, for the first time in years maybe, he made a clear choice. He picked up the phone. He called the police. And the recording of that call, I mean, you can hear the absolute panic. He screams, y'all better come here right now. I just killed a man.
The police arrive, and I have to assume they think this is just a domestic dispute or a drug deal gone bad.
That's exactly what they thought. They walk in, they see the paint cans, the wine, the dead body on the floor. They see a hysterical kid with a gun. They cuff Henley. It seems like an open and shut case of homicide.
But Henley can't keep his mouth shut.
No. He's in the back of the patrol car. The adrenaline is crashing. The guilt is crashing down on him. And he looks at the officer and says, I have to get it off my chest.
And the officer probably thinks, okay, kid, tell me why you shot him. Self-defense.
But Henley starts talking about the others. He says, I didn't just kill him. We killed 6 or 8 others.
The cops must have thought he was hallucinating, that it was the paint fumes talking.
They did. They told him to shut up. They thought he was delirious. But Henley insisted. He said, if you don't believe me, go to the boat shed.
The boat shed. And this is where the abstract horror becomes sickeningly physical.
It was a rented stall in southwest Houston. Henley guides them there. It's the middle of the night now. They open the door. It just smells like damp earth and lime.
I read the account of Officer Carl Siebeneicher, one of the first on the scene.
Right. He described walking in, taking a few steps, and then realizing the ground felt soft, spongy, disturbingly soft. He dug a heel in, and he hit something solid that wasn't a rock.
They bring in the shovels.
And the nightmare begins. They found bodies stacked like cordwood, wrapped in plastic sheeting, covered in quicklime to speed up decomposition and mask the smell.
How many? In that one shed?
In that one shed, 17.
17 bodies.
Yeah.
In a single rental stall.
And that was just the beginning of the dig.
It's hard to even visualize that. 17 people. That's a classroom. That's a baseball team and its alternates. And they were just stacked.
They were buried in layers. The investigators described a scene that was almost impossible to process. The smell alone, that mix of lime and decomposition, was overwhelming. But what really hit them, what really humanized it, were the personal effects.
What did they find?
It wasn't just bones, it was the stuff of teenage life. Keys to a car that was never found, a ring, a belt buckle. And sitting right there in the shed was the torture board. It was like finding the murder weapon and the victims all in the same tomb.
And Henley didn't stop at the shed.
No. Once the news broke, and it broke huge, obviously David Brooks saw it on TV. He knew his time was up. He went to the police station and turned himself in. And between the two of them, they started drawing a map for the police.
A map of graves. Where else had they buried people?
There were two other primary sites. One was at Lake Sam Rayburn. The Corll family had a log cabin up there. It was a beautiful, scenic spot. But they led police to a wooded area nearby, and they dug up 4 more bodies.
And the beach.
High Island Beach. This is a desolate stretch of the Gulf Coast. They had taken victims down there, killed them, and buried them in the sand dunes. Police recovered 6 bodies there.
So, if we're keeping count, 17 in the shed, 4 at the lake, 6 at the beach. That's 27 bodies found in a matter of days.
It was a literal assembly line of death. The sheer logistics of it are baffling. Digging that many graves, transporting that many bodies without being seen. It implies a level of physical labor and planning that is just chilling to contemplate.
This brings us to the question that hangs over this entire case. The question every parent in Houston was screaming in August of 1973. How? How do 27, 29, maybe more boys disappear from the same neighborhoods and nobody connects the dots?
To understand that, you have to take off your 2026 glasses and put on 1973 glasses. You have to understand the culture of the era.
The generation gap.
Exactly. This is post-Woodstock. This is the height of the counterculture. Teenagers weren't just rebels. They were actively separating from the adult world. Hitchhiking was normal. It was how you got around.
I've seen photos from back then. Kids with backpacks just thumbing rides on the interstate like it was a city bus.
It was a different world. And because of that, there was a massive transient population of young people. Kids were running away to Haight-Ashbury or just hitting the road to find themselves. It was a cultural phenomenon.
And the police had a very convenient label for all of them: runaways.
That label was a shield for police inaction. It was the default setting. When a parent called the Houston PD to report their teenage son missing, the police response was almost robotic. He's a teenage boy. He probably just took off to California. He'll be back when he runs out of money.
But the parents knew better. They knew their kids.
They did. Take the Winkle family. Their son, Gregory Winkle, disappears. His mother goes down to the station. She tells them, "My son is missing." The police say, "He's a runaway." And she says, "He was wearing a swimsuit. He had 80 cents in his pocket." Who runs away to California with 80 cents and no shoes?
It defies all logic.
But the police were rigid. They told parents, "Why are you down here bothering us? You know your boys are runaways." There was this systemic arrogance. They simply refused to believe that a predator could be operating on this scale in their city.
And Corll's weaponized this arrogance. That's why he made them write the letters.
Exactly. We mentioned the letters earlier, but now you see the tactical brilliance of it. When Mrs. Winkle or Mrs. Waldrop gets a letter, even if it's weird, even if it doesn't sound like their son, the police look at it and say, "See, we told you, he's in Austin, he's fine, case closed."
It gave the police a fileable excuse to do nothing.
It confirmed their bias. We don't need to investigate because the kid isn't missing, he's just gone. It was a perfect vicious circle.
But there were other missed clues. It wasn't just the letters. There were actual tips given to the police.
Right. There were massive red flags that were ignored. Everett Waldrop, the father of 2 of the victims, was doing his own investigation because the police wouldn't. In 1971, 2 full years before Corll died, Waldrop got a tip. An acquaintance told him that Corll was burying things at night at the boat shed.
2 years early, they could have saved dozens of lives.
They could have, Waldrop told the police. And they did a check. They drove out, looked at the shed, saw it was locked, didn't smell anything, didn't dig, didn't get a warrant, and they just walked away, dismissed it.
That is just, it's infuriating.
And it wasn't the only one. There were also witnesses at High Island who saw men digging strange holes in the dunes at night. They reported it, ignored. The police just did not care about missing teenage boys from working-class families. If these had been missing cheerleaders from affluent neighborhoods, the response would have been very, very different.
It really highlights how vulnerable that specific demographic was. Young males were seen as independent, capable of fending for themselves, and therefore not in need of the same level of protection.
The families were, rightfully, furious. When the bodies were finally found, that grief turned into an incredible rage. They felt betrayed. This wasn't just a killer hiding in the shadows. This was a killer hiding behind police apathy.
So the aftermath. The killer is dead. Corll is gone. But the accomplices are alive.
Yeah.
What happened to David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley?
The legal battles were intense. Elmer Wayne Henley was indicted for 6 of the murders. Now, remember his defense?
He claimed he was a victim too, that he was acting under duress.
He claimed duress. He said, "I was terrified of Dean. If I didn't do it, he would have killed me." And there was a grain of truth to that. Corll was dangerous. But the prosecution pointed out the timeline. This went on for years. Henley had money. He had a car. He had a gun. He had 1,000 chances to walk away or go to the police, and he didn't.
The jury didn't buy the scared kid act.
Not for a second. He was found guilty, and the judge threw the book at him. He was sentenced to 594 years. That's 6 consecutive 99-year terms.
Wow, that is a statement sentence if I've ever heard one.
It was. He was later retried due to a technicality and given concurrent sentences instead of consecutive, but the result is the same. He is still in prison. He's actually become something of a jailhouse artist. He paints. And he's been denied parole repeatedly, most recently in 2025. He will almost certainly die in prison.
And what about David Brooks, the first accomplice?
Brooks tried a different angle. He claimed he was just an accessory, an innocent bystander who watched but didn't actually kill anyone. He tried to paint Henley as the psycho and Corll as the mastermind, leaving himself as just the guy driving the car.
Did that work?
No. He was tried for the murder of William Ray Lawrence. The testimony showed he was present, he helped restrain victims, he was an active participant, and he benefited from the crimes. He got life imprisonment. He ended up dying in prison in 2020 from COVID-19 complications.
So they both spent their lives behind bars. Justice of a sort. But for the families, the ordeal didn't end with the convictions because for a long, long time, many of those bodies weren't identified.
This is the forensic tragedy of the case. You have to remember, in 1973, DNA testing as we know it didn't exist. Identification relied on dental records, which were spotty for poor kids who might not have seen a dentist regularly, or clothing descriptions.
He was wearing blue jeans, describes half the teenage boys in the country at the time.
Exactly. So many of the bodies were simply labeled unknown. They were buried in paupers' graves. The families knew their sons were dead, but they didn't have a body to bury, no final resting place.
But science eventually caught up.
It did, thanks largely to the incredible persistence of forensic anthropologists like Dr. Sharon Derrick at the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences. They never gave up on these lost boys. In the 2000s, as DNA technology improved, they started exhuming the unknown bodies and building new profiles.
Can you give us some examples of the breakthroughs they had?
Sure. Randall Harvey, he was just a skeleton for decades. He was identified in 2008. Joseph Lyles was identified in 2009 using a DNA match. These were huge moments for the families. Finally, after 30-plus years, they could bring their sons home.
But there were also mistakes made in 1973 that needed to be corrected. I read about the mix-ups.
This is heartbreaking. In 1973, in the rush to close cases, a body was identified as a boy named Michael Balch. The family buried him, they mourned him, they visited his grave for decades.
Okay.
And it turns out that identification was wrong. The real Michael Balch wasn't identified until 2010. The body the Balch family had been visiting for nearly 40 years was actually another victim, Roy Bunton.
Oh my God. So the Button family spent 40 years thinking their son was still missing, his body never found.
Yes. Roy Bunton wasn't officially identified until 2011. Imagine that agony, waiting 4 decades for a knock on the door, only to find out he had been found back in 1973 and mislabeled.
And the work still isn't done. There's still one victim from that Burt shed who remains unidentified to this day.
The swimsuit boy. In the official files, he's ML733356.
What do we know about him?
We have some clues. He was wearing distinctive red, white, and blue swim trunks, very 1970s style. He had a shirt with a peace symbol and some handwritten letters on it, maybe LB4MF or something similar.
And physically?
Any markers? The skeletal analysis suggests he might have had a mild form of spina bifida. There's a strong belief in the online sleuthing community that he might be a boy named Bobby French, based on photos and anonymous tips. But here's the problem. To confirm it, you need DNA. And you need a family reference sample to match it to. Without that definitive match, he remains nameless.
So if you're listening to this and you had a relative named Bobby French or anyone else who disappeared in Houston around 1973,
Please contact the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences.
and they're also missing bodies, right? People we know were killed but were never found.
Mark Scott. Henley confessed to killing him and burying him at High Island Beach. But despite extensive searching, his body was never recovered. The coast changes. Storms, hurricanes, erosion. It's likely his grave was simply washed away into the Gulf of Mexico.
It's a lonely thought. Just gone.
And there's physical evidence of more victims than we have names for. In the boat shed, they found extra bones. Extra arm bones. A piece of a child's skull that didn't match any of the other 17 skeletons. It indicates the count is higher than 29.
That brings up a terrifying thought. Corll was digging holes in his backyard back in the 60s. He claimed he was burying spoiled candy.
That's right. Neighbors reported seeing him digging in the backyard of his house on Judaway Street in the late 60s. When asked, he said he was burying bad candy batches. But knowing what we know now, it's highly probable those were test graves. Or, even more chillingly, earlier victims we know nothing about.
I want to touch on one last theory that always comes up with this case, the national sex ring. We talked about the lie Corll told Henley. But was there any truth to it at all? Was Corll actually part of some larger organization?
This is the rabbit hole that investigators went down for years. Corll told Henley he was part of a Dallas ring. And strangely, when police investigated, they did find some circumstantial connections. Corll had the name of a known child pornographer, a man named Roy Ames, in his wallet when he died.
That's a pretty solid link.
It is. And around that same time, there was a big bust in Dallas, the John David Norman ring. Police raided it and found a list of thousands of names. But here's the conclusion most experts and investigators have settled on. While Corll might have had contacts in that world or consumed that material, the murders were his own.
He wasn't shipping boys to Dallas.
No. There is zero evidence he ever sold or transported a boy. He was a collector of victims, not a merchant. The ring story was a convenient and brilliant lie to keep his accomplices in line. The sadism was personal. It was all for him.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what is the legacy of this case? Beyond the sheer horror of it, did it change anything?
It forced a massive and long overdue change in policing. The runaway excuse could no longer stand. The public outcry led to the creation of Operation Peace of Mind in Houston, which was a dedicated runaway hotline. And nationally, it pushed for the reforms in how missing children reports are handled.
We take things like the Amber Alert system or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for granted now.
But those systems were built on the ashes of the failures exposed by cases like Dean Corll's. It highlighted the desperate need for connected databases. It showed us that a kid missing in Houston might be connected to a predator who operates across county lines. It forced law enforcement to take missing children seriously, regardless of their background.
At its heart, it's a tragedy of trust. Corll used the trust of a neighbor. He used the trust of a father figure. He weaponized the community's sense of safety against itself.
And he proved that evil doesn't always look like a monster from a movie. Sometimes it looks like the guy running the candy shop across the street from the elementary school. It's the banality of it that sticks with you.
I want to leave you with one final thought, something that keeps me up at night whenever I read about this case. In 2012, a photo was released. It was found in Elmer Wayne Henley's personal effects in prison.
The Polaroid.
It's a picture of a boy. He's blonde. He looks terrified. He is handcuffed to the torture board. The toolbox is right there next to him. You can see the carpet of the apartment.
We have the date, we have the location, we have the killer in the room, but the boy.
That boy is not any of the known 29 victims. His face doesn't match any of the identified bodies or the missing person photos.
Which means we have a photograph of a murder in progress, or at least a torture session of a victim we have never, ever accounted for.
We don't know who he is. We don't know where he is buried. So when we say 29 victims, that's just the number we found. The real question is, how many other lost boys are actually still out there, buried in places Corll never revealed?
That is the chilling reality of the Dean Corll case. We may never, ever know the full count.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive. Stay curious, stay safe, and look out for each other. We'll see you next time.
Welcome to The Debate. Today we are opening the file on a case that really reset the baseline for criminal horror in the United States. We're looking at the years between 1970 and 1973 in Houston, Texas, where a minimum of 29 teenage boys and young men were abducted, tortured, and murdered. The central figure was a man named Dean Arnold Corll. known to neighborhood children as the Candy Man. And when they finally came to light, it wasn't just some local tragedy. I mean, this was, at the time, the worst example of serial murder in American history.
It completely redefined the landscape. You have this central figure who appears, utterly banal, an electrician, a former candy shop owner, and yet he orchestrated a level of sustained violence that is it's difficult to comprehend. But looking back at the source material, the question that haunts me isn't just about the mechanics of what Corll did. It is about the permission structure. How does a man operate a torture chamber in a densely populated suburb for 3 years without being stopped?
And that right there, that brings us to the core tension we're dissecting today. Was the tragedy of the Houston mass murders primarily the result of a singular, highly manipulative mastermind, Dean Corll, operating with a genius-level capacity for concealment and control? Or was this catastrophe the result of a perfect storm of systemic police negligence and the complex, willing sociopathy of his teenage accomplices?
It's a critical distinction. Because if we attribute everything to Corll's evil genius, we let the rest of the system off the hook. I take the position that Corll was not a mastermind. He was the beneficiary of a broken system. His spree was only possible because of a massive failure of social institutions that dismissed victims as runaways, and the active agency of accomplices who were, frankly, more villains than victims.
I have to push back on that right away. I represent the perspective that Corll was the architect. He was a singular force who manipulated everyone around him, from the accomplices he groomed to the very parents he deceived. Individual pathology was the primary driver here. The system failed, yes, but it failed because it was up against a predator it had never seen before and was just ill-equipped to understand.
Let's test that architect theory. You claim he was a singular force, but he needed a lot of help to make this machine run.
But look at the man's background. To understand the mastermind theory, you have to look at his capacity for discipline and the facade he constructed. Dean Corll wasn't a chaotic drifter. He was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, had a strict father, a protective mother. He was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1964, served 10 months, and got an honorable discharge. He was a radio repairman during his service. That speaks to technical competence and an ability to follow rigid structures. Competence.
Sure, but being a radio repairman doesn't exactly make you a criminal genius.
But it establishes that he was capable, organized, and intelligent. After the Army, he came back to Houston Heights to work in the family business, the Corll Candy Company. And this is where the Candyman persona was born. He was the vice president of the company. He gave free candy to local children. This wasn't just benevolence, it was predatory grooming. He was buying trust. And when the candy business failed, he didn't spiral. He took a job as an electrician at Houston Lighting and Power and eventually became a supervisor. He held that job until the day he died.
That sounds like a standard working-class trajectory, not a master plan.
It's the compartmentalization that is terrifying. To be a reliable supervisor at a major utility company by day, dealing with logistics and people, and then go home to a boat shed or a torture board by night. That requires a level of psychological control that is almost inhuman. He wasn't just getting away with it. He was living two distinct lives with perfect separation.
I don't dispute his ability to wear a mask, but let's look at the environment he was operating in. You call it a master plan, I call it targeting the vulnerable. He focused on Houston Heights, which was a low-income neighborhood at the time. He preyed on financial desperation. He didn't need to be a genius to know that the police in the early 1970s didn't prioritize poor kids who went missing.
To write letters to their parents while they were being held captive. Balch wrote that he'd found work, that he was traveling. Corll mailed these letters to allay suspicion. That proves the crimes continued because of his strategic planning. He was running a counterintelligence operation against the families.
It was strategic, I'll grant you, but it only worked because the Houston Police Department, the HPD, was desperate to believe it. This is where my argument for systemic failure really takes over. Parents knew something was wrong.
Mrs. Winkle, whose son went missing, famously told the police, "You don't run away with nothing but a bathing suit and 80 cents."
The police response was certainly lacking.
Lacking is an understatement. It was negligent. The police chief told Everett Waldrop, another grieving father, "Why are you down here? You know your boys are runaways." The system had a preset narrative. Boys from the Heights, run away. Corll just walks through the door the police held open for him. If the police had done basic investigative work on the first 3 disappearances, those strategic letters wouldn't have mattered.
That brings us to the mechanism of the crimes themselves, the accomplices. You can't talk about Corll without talking about David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. And this is where the mastermind theory is strongest.
And this is where we really disagree on agency. You see them as pawns, I see them as active participants in what was basically a murder-for-hire scheme.
They were children when he found them. Corll met Brooks in 1967. Brooks was only 12 years old. Corll became a father figure to him. He paid him, sheltered him. By the time the killing started, Brooks was a dropout, completely dependent on Corll for his survival. And when Elmer Wayne Henley enters the picture in 1971, Corll uses a really sophisticated narrative to entrap him. He tells Henley he is part of a white slavery ring based in Dallas.
The Blackbird theory?
Exactly. He convinced these boys that the victims weren't being killed, but sold into a ring. It was a psychological buffer. It allowed these teenagers to rationalize their involvement. We see this psychological trap so clearly with Henley. He actually tried to stop the murder of Frank Aguirre. He tried to persuade Corll not to kill him, but Corll refused. That moment proves Henley was operating under a delusion Corll created. And when reality broke through, he was terrified.
I think you are giving Henley way too much credit for morality. Henley admitted in his own confessions that he eventually realized Corll was killing the boys, not selling them. The white slavery story fell apart, and yet he continued. Why? Because Corll was paying him. It was a transaction. Henley was offered $200 per victim. In modern currency, that is roughly $1,670 per head.
You think a teenager can process the moral weight of murder for $200? That speaks to how effectively Corll had warped their reality.
Is it a warped reality, or is it greed? Look at David Brooks. In his confession, Brooks admitted witnessing many deaths. He said it didn't bother him. He watched it done many times. That is a profound level of callousness that you can't just attribute to Corll's influence. And let's look at Henley again. He didn't just lure strangers. He recruited his own friends. He brought in David Hillagist, a lifelong friend. You don't hand over a childhood friend to a man you know is a monster because of a delusion. You do it because you have dehumanized the victim to get your payout. Henley admitted as much. He said he had to view them as objects to cope. That's an active choice.
If he was such a willing villain, then why did the spree end? It ended because Henley shot Corll. On August 8, 1973, when Corll threatened to kill Henley's friends, Rhonda Williams and Timothy Curley, Henley made a choice. He shot Corll to save them. Doesn't that prove that his true morality was just suppressed by fear until that breaking point? If he was purely money-driven, he would have let Corll kill them too.
Or it just proves he had a line he wouldn't cross when it came to a specific circle, but was fine victimizing others. That isn't morality. That's tribalism. He was fine watching Frank Aguirre die, but when the gun turned toward him and his inner circle, he reacted. That's self-preservation.
I interpret that very differently. I see a kid snapping out of a trance. But let's pivot to the methodology. You claim the police failure was the primary driver, but Corll's operational security was surprisingly high for a man with no criminal record.
Was it, or was it just that no one was looking?
It was adaptive. He moved frequently. He started at the Harold Turboff Apartments, moved to Yorktown, then Schuler Street, Wirt Road, and finally Lamar Drive. He changed locations to avoid detection. He used specific burial sites, the boat shed in southwest Houston, the woodland near Lake Sam Rayburn, High Island Beach. These weren't random dumps. They were calculated. He even used lime and plastic sheeting to accelerate decomposition and mask odors.
The lime and plastic are standard, but let's look at the security. It was flimsy. Mr. and Mrs. Abernathy reported seeing 3 men bearing a large bundle at Galveston Beach.
They identified Corll and Henley. They went to the authorities. The police didn't investigate. That isn't genius concealment. That's getting caught and being let go because the system doesn't care.
But consider the depth of his preparation. This is a detail that's often overlooked. Former employees of the Corll Candy Company recalled Corll digging in the factory floor years prior, burying spoiled candy. He was practicing. He would dig holes, bury the candy, and cement over the floor. He collected nylon cord from his job at the power company, the same cord used to strangle victims. This suggests a premeditation that spans years. He was actively refining a methodology of death long before the first body drop.
And yet parents were the ones doing the police work. Selma Winkle and the Hillogists printed reward posters. Ironically, Henley helped distribute them to deflect suspicion. The police failure was so severe that Governor Dolph Briscoe had to establish Operation Peace of Mind afterward, a hotline for runaways, specifically because the system had been designed to ignore these types of victims. Corll didn't need to be a genius. He just needed to target boys the police viewed as expendable.
That brings us to the aftermath. The discovery of the bodies was chaotic, but it also highlighted just how total Corll's dominance was, right up until his death. The police didn't catch him. He died because his control slipped for one night.
And even after he died, the incompetence continued. This is where my argument for systemic failure really cements itself. After Henley confessed and led them to the boat shed, they found body after body. It was a horror show. But once the count hit 27, surpassing Juan Corona's record at the time, the HPD essentially stopped searching.
I mean, that is a harsh assessment. They had a mass casualty event on their hands. The sheer volume of victims, 29 known, potentially more, would overwhelm any department in 1973.
It didn't just overwhelm them, it bored them. Henley insisted there were 2 more bodies at High Island and 2 more in the boat shed. An officer was quoted saying, "What difference does it make? They had enough for the record book, so they stopped digging." That isn't about Corll anymore. That's about a lack of regard for the victims. They treated the recovery like a scorecard.
I will concede that the forensic handling was botched, but the chaos of that discovery reveals Corll's true nature. The bodies were sodomized, tortured, some with glass rods. The final confrontation on August 8th happened because Corll broke his own pattern. He was furious Henley brought a girl, Rhonda Williams. His rage at that loss of control is what got him killed. It reinforces that he was the engine of this entire machine. When the engine stalled, the whole thing collapsed.
But let's look at the victims who were left behind by the system even after discovery. We talk about 27 or 29, but the identification process was a disaster. Michael Balch was misidentified as Roy Bunton for decades. This was only resolved in 2011. Stephen Sickman was misidentified as Mark Scott. Why? Because the police relied on flimsy circumstantial evidence and ignored Henley's specific directions about who was buried where.
Forensics in the 70s were not what they are today. DNA testing didn't exist.
True, but consider the swimsuit boy, John Houston Doe, who remains unidentified to this day. He was found wearing red, white, and blue swimming trunks and a shirt with a peace symbol. More importantly, he had spina bifida. This is a child with very specific medical and physical identifiers. Someone is missing a child with those specific characteristics. And yet, because of the chaotic processing and the runaway stigma, he remains nameless over 50 years later. That is the legacy of the system, not just the killer.
There is another layer to this, though. You attribute the failure to investigate to apathy. I think there might be something darker. We need to talk about the ring theory.
You mean the connection to a national network?
Yes. I mentioned earlier that the white slavery narrative was likely a manipulation tool Corll used on Henley, but there's evidence suggesting Corll was not operating entirely in a vacuum. Police found a business card for Roy Ames in Corll's wallet. Ames was a known pornographer and producer of child pornography in Houston. Then, in 1975, 2 years after Corll died, a cache of photos was found in Houston depicting some of Corll's known victims.
And you have the link to the John David Norman ring in Dallas?
Exactly. Norman ran a massive ring. When police raided it, they found a card file with 10,000 names. The presence of Ames' card and the photos suggest Corll might have been a supplier or at least a node in a much larger, darker network. This recontextualizes him not just as a lone serial killer, but as part of an organized criminal enterprise.
But this actually proves my point about negligence. The HPD discovered this cache. They found the link to Roy Ames. They knew about the raid on John David Norman's ring. And what did they do? They declined to pursue the link.
They stated the families had suffered enough.
Which is a convenient way to avoid a massive, sprawling investigation that might have implicated wealthy or powerful individuals across the country. That is the ultimate proof of the systemic negligence argument. The refusal to investigate a potential nationwide network is negligence of the highest order. It left the true scope of Corll's activities, and perhaps the fate of other boys, forever unknown, because it was too much work or too politically dangerous to pull that thread.
It is a disturbing thought, but we have to be careful not to conflate police unwillingness with Corll's actual operations. There is no conclusive evidence he ever sold a boy. He killed them. That was his pathology. The ring might have been for photos, but the torture and murder were his own dark design.
Perhaps. But if the police don't investigate, we can't know. And that silence is part of the systemic failure.
As we move to close, I want to summarize my position. Dean Corll was a unique predator. He exploited every weakness in the human psyche and the social fabric, yes, but his ability to function as a supervisor at HL&P, to maintain a torture chamber in a quiet neighborhood, to methodically bury bodies for 3 years, this suggests a terrifying compartmentalization. He was a man who could turn off his humanity like a light switch. No standard policing could easily catch a man who leaves no witnesses and has the perfect camouflage of a steady job and a Candyman persona.
It is a compelling portrait of a monster, but I cannot look past the environment that fed him. Gordy Emmett was enabled by a society that viewed missing teen boys from the Heights as expendable runaways. The police dismissed parents. They dismissed witnesses. They stopped digging when the body count got too high. The fact that David Brooks died in 2020 of COVID-19 and Henley remains in prison, denied parole as recently as November 2025, doesn't change the fact that opportunities to stop them were missed repeatedly by authorities who simply didn't value the victims enough to look.
It is a tragedy on every level, and both of us can agree that the truth is likely worse than the official record.
Absolutely. We know there are extra arm bones found at High Island that likely belong to Donald Falcon. Yet he isn't officially listed as a murder victim because they only found the arms. We have the swimsuit boy, still nameless. We have Henley's insistence that more bodies are out there.
It serves as a grim reminder. Whether you believe it was the singular evil of Dean Corll or the blind eye of the state, the result was the same. A generation of boys was lost.
And we are left to wonder if monsters are born or if they are allowed to thrive by a society that looks away.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.
Until next time.